Hey guys, so I'm here to do the rundown on Chapter 4 of Stephen King's It. Chapter 4 involves Ben Hanscom. It says Ben Hanscom takes a fall. So basically it takes place after the 6 phone calls. This phone call that went to Ben, if you recall in Chapter 3, once he got the phone call, he went over to his favorite bar, which I think was called the Red Wheel or Wagon Wheel or Red Wagon. And he got plastered basically. He drank a stein full of whiskey. So now he's on his way to fulfill his promise, and he is on an airplane to Maine. It is a stormy night. He's already shooken up, and he is so drunk that the stewardess at one point believes that he is dead. He at one point just looks completely motionless. His eyes are wide open, just staring at her. She's totally creeped out. The plane is in chaos because of the storm. People are pressing their call buttons. Things are falling out of the overhead storage. And she's fixated on these eyes that are staring at her. And she's contemplating the different things that she might need to do to cover up this dead guy. That when he arrived on the plane, she thought he was totally drunk and thought he was going to be such a problem, and she was actually relieved he was so quiet until she's staring into his eyes thinking that he has passed away. And now she's thinking about getting a blanket, covering him up, making him look like he's sleeping so nobody knows the difference. And he eventually blinks and she realizes that adult Ben Hanscom is not dead. He is very much alive. And he starts rambling off some stuff to her about his childhood, which she excuses herself because she just wants to get away from him and she's really busy. And he's left there to think about his own memories. So he drifts off to sleep, and as it says in the book, he kind of time travels back to 1958 in his mind. And where do we find Ben Hanscom in 1958? He's 11 years old. He is just finishing the 5th grade. Unlike the movie, Ben Hanscom has lived there his whole life. It wasn't his first day of school. It was actually the last day of school, the last day of 5th grade. And he is madly in love with Beverly Marsh. And she is actually the only one in his class. The others are in a different class. And he admires her from far away. She's got, of course, she's poor, so she has these tattered clothes from the thrift store. And she's got these faint yellow bruises on her face because she always gets a whacking from her dad. But he's in love with her, and it just goes on how he daydreams about her and everything. So Ben is a big boy. I know in the movie he's chunky, but in here it talks more about how he's pretty big. He's pretty hefty. He's always wearing big sweaters because he likes to cover himself up. And I guess the one time he decided to wear a shirt his mother got him for Christmas, it was a little too fitting, and Belch the bully decided to tell everybody that Santa Claus brought Ben a set of big titties for Christmas. After that, everybody kind of called him Titties. Well, the bullies and some of the other not so nice kids. So he always wore big baggy shirts. Ben is super lonely. He's always been by himself. It says that he probably wouldn't even realize that he was lonely because he's never been anything but by himself. It doesn't talk about his father, and his mother's always at work, so he doesn't have any friends. He's always on the play yard by himself, always reading to himself, and he's just a lonely kid. He's just by himself, no friends. On the last day of school, we find Ben hurrying up trying to get out of school because he, a week before, was taking the final to pass 5th grade. And Henry Bowers, the bully, Bowers, wanted a copy off of his paper, in which Ben contemplated and thought about everything and realized that if Henry flunked out of 5th grade again, he would get stuck in 5th grade, meaning that he wouldn't be in Ben's 6th grade class. Ben thought this was a great idea and decided to turn Henry down on his attempt to copy his test, which of course we hear Henry Bowers say, "You're dead, fat boy." So Ben is worried. He's leaving as fast as he can. He's thinking that Henry Bowers is right on his tail. He grabs his grade card, and he doesn't want to find out if Henry passed or not, because if he flunked, he knows that Henry's going to blame him and kick his ass, basically. So he runs out to the yard. He stands on the stoop, can't believe it's the last day of school. He has the encounter with Beverly. You like this place all day? You're going to stand here all day? Or you like this place so much you're going to stand here all day? And super excited about that. He was very excited because she talked to him, and as she walked away, he admired her, thought about it. And he seems to like this was a good start of his day. He sees Belch and Victor off to the side waiting for Henry, which prompts him to take off. So Ben is taking a walk on his way home, and he finds a bag that has some recyclables, 2 cans, 2 bottles, and he describes it like finding gold. He turns it in and gets a whole 28 cents, where he goes, gets a big bag of candy, like lots of goodies, for 28 cents. So, times have changed since 1958. He was having, it seems like a very content day. He left school, he got good grades, Beverly Marsh talked to him, he found some recyclables, he's got a big bag of candy, and so now he heads to the library, one of his favorite places. As we know, Ben it turns out to be an architect, so he admires the architecture of this building. It's a very large building, kind of like 2 large buildings with a glass corridor in the middle is how they describe it, spiral staircases inside, and it's just one of his favorite places to be. So as he's entering the library, he doesn't realize that nearby Victor, Belch, and Henry Bowers have spotted him. And Henry Bowers did not get held back, but he does have to go to summer school, and he has to spend 4 hours a day in summer school for 4 weeks, which he's really pissed off about, because his dad has a farm, and his dad is gonna, instead of whipping him once for flunking, his dad's gonna whip him every day that he has to go to school for not being able to help at the farm. So he wants to take all his angst out on poor Ben. So they decide to wait outside until Ben comes out. Ben goes into the library. He is looking around. He picks out some library books. He signs up for a reading club. And he sees a sign regarding, on the bulletin board, regarding the 7 p.m. curfew. And so it says here, reminder, the curfew, 7 p.m., Derry Police Department. Just looking at it gave Ben a chill. In the excitement of getting his rank card, worrying about Henry Bowers, talking with Beverly, and starting summer vacation, he had forgotten all about the curfew and the murders. People argued about how many there had been, but everyone agreed that there had been at least 4 since the winter, 5 if you counted George Dennebraw. Many held the opinion that little Dennebraw's boy death must have been some kind of bizarre freak accident. The first everyone was sure of was Betty Rupson, who had been found the day after Christmas. This had not been in the paper, nor was it anything an adult had spoken. It was just something he had picked up around the corners of overheard conversation. The girl, who was 13, had been found mutilated and frozen in the muddy earth. About 3.5 months later, a fisherman working the bank of a stream 20 miles east of Derry had hooked onto something he believed at first to be a stick. It had turned out to be the hand, wrist, and first 4 inches of a girl's forearm. The state police had found the rest of Cheryl LaMonica 70 yards farther downstream. In late April, a junior high teacher on a nature walk with his 8th grade class had spied a pair of red sneakers and a pair of blue corduroy bumpers protruding from the mouth of Culvert on Merritt Street. The body had been that of 3-year-old Matthew Clements. His mother, so stunned by her grief that she seemed to exist in a glass ball of utter calm, told police that Matty had been riding his tricycle up and down a sidewalk beside the house, which stood on the corner of Kansas Street and Kossuth Lane. She went to put her washing in the dryer, and when she next looked out the window to check on Matty, he was gone. There had only been his overturned trike on the grass between the sidewalk and the street. One of the back wheels was still spinning lazily. As she looked, it came to a stop. So we know that part is in the miniseries. It's actually the opening scene where the mom is doing laundry. She's hanging sheets, and her daughter's sitting out there playing on her tricycle. And between the sheets, you see Pennywise, and he gives the little girl a friendly wave. And then the sheets fly through again, and this time Pennywise has this evil sort of look, and the girl gets kind of stunned, and you just hear her scream off into the wind. The mom comes out, and all you see is the spinning tricycle turned upside down. So that part was in the miniseries. In the miniseries, it's a girl. In the book, it's a boy. 2 weeks ago, a boy Ben knew only vaguely had looked into one of the storm drains out by Neibolt Street and had seen what looked like hair floating around in there. The boy, whose name was either Frankie or Freddie Ross, had been out prospecting for goodies with a gadget of his own invention, which he called the Fabulous Gum Stick, which is basically a stick with some gum on it that he stuck in the storm drain to pick things up. Frankie or Freddie had worked the Fabulous Gum Stick back and forth through the grate of the storm drain, believing he had found a wig. He thought maybe he could dry it out and give it to his mother for her birthday or something. After a few minutes of poking and prodding, just as he was about to give up, a face had floated out of the murky water in the plug drain, a face with dead leaves plastered to its white cheeks and dirt in its staring eyes. So, a lot of kids are turning up dead, and that's why they have the 7 p.m. curfew. And I think something that's important to note is that being horror fans, horror fans of books or movies or just anything in general, but let's say movies, you see a Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees, and we're intrigued. We're not scared. We're never scared because it's entertainment to us. Pennywise is entertainment. He's scary, but he's entertaining. He's funny. He's a character, and we know he's a character, which is why it's not scary. In reality, if you're really paying attention, and you're not just looking at, even if it was Freddy Krueger, and you're really paying attention, and you're like this was a child killer, a child murderer. He killed kids, and even though he's more fascinating as this immortal killing machine, he should still be terrifying because he's still murdering children, Freddy Krueger. But he's not, because we see him as entertainment. We look forward to what kind of kill he's going to do. Who deserves to die? How much bloodshed there is, we look forward to that stuff. And the same as this, and it's the same with Pennywise. We look at Pennywise, and he's a character. He's an iconic horror character. We look at him to amuse us, and so it takes that part of us supposed to be being afraid, and we're just entertained by the thought of it. And in the book, when you're reading it, it kind of, if you take it apart, you've got this murderer out there. He's murdering children. There's something out there nobody's talking about. To them, they don't know it's a monster quite yet. The kids are aware that something's out there, some kind of boogeyman. The parents are thinking there's some kind of rampaged murderer, sex fiend out there that's preying on children. But it's a scary thought because these children are being ripped to shreds and they're missing limbs. And I mean, just in this one, the kid's looking into the sewer, and this face floats up at him. That would be terrifying. This face floating up at you with leaves stuck to its face, and it's just, you know what I mean? But as horror fans, it's hard for us to envision that sometimes because we're looking for the entertainment value in everything. And I think if you really look at it, this is why Pennywise is terrifying, and we tend to lose track of that when we're watching movies, and our interest is solely focused on the kill count and the death scene. Anyways, so I can't remember where I was. Okay, so he sees this curfew posted in the library. And it kind of triggers his memory of an incident that happened, or a conversation he had with his mom. And his mom had told him to be in by 6 every day. She bought him a watch, which he was pretty stoked about. And she told him to walk home every day with one of his friends. which he was pretty saddened about because his mom never even realized that Ben had no friends, never did, never had at that point. And but he was really stoked about the watch, and she wanted him. She said there was no excuses now. He could look at the watch and be home by 6 p.m. She knew that there was a killer out there. She asked him if anything had happened to him. He said no, which was a lie. As she's having a conversation with him, it's more towards the summer, and something had happened to him in January that it doesn't tell to the end of the chapter, but I'm going to say now because it kind of gets lost if you don't. So he's having a conversation with his mom, and he's thinking back into, actually, he thinks back at some point in the chapter about what happened in January. It says he had just left school. It was during January. It was very wintry. It was super cold. There was a freezing wind all over him, and he was helping out his teacher. So he leaves a little bit too late than he should have. It's already starting to get dark outside, and he doesn't want to wait for the teacher's husband to come. So he decides to walk home. He gets to the area of the bridge where the canal flows through, and that leads off into the Barrens. And he sees a figure down there. So it says, a figure was standing on the ice down there. Ben stared at it and thought, there may be a man down there, but could he be wearing what it looks like he's wearing? It's impossible, isn't it? The figure was dressed in what appeared to be a white silver clown suit. It rippled around him in the polar wind. There were oversized orange shoes on the feet. They matched the pom-pom buttons which ran down the front of his suit. One hand grasped a bundle of strings which rose to a bright bunch of balloons, and when Ben observed the balloons, they were floating in his direction. He felt unreality wash over him more strongly. He closed his eyes, rubbed them open. The balloons still appeared to be floating towards him. It had to be an hallucination or a mirage brought on by some sort of weird trick of the weather. There could be a man down there on the ice, and he supposed it was even technically possible he could be wearing a clown suit. But the balloons couldn't be flowing toward Ben, into the wind. Yet that is just what they appeared to be doing. Ben, the clown called from the ice. Ben thought that was a voice only in his mind, although it seemed he heard it in his ears. Want a balloon, Ben? There was something so evil in that voice, so awful, that Ben wanted to run away as fast as he could, but his feet seemed as welded to the sidewalk as the teeter-totters to the schoolyard were welded to the ground. They float, Ben. They all float. Try one and see. The clown began walking along the ice toward the canal bridge where Ben stood. Ben watched him come, not moving. He watched as a bird watches an approaching snake. The balloons should have burst in the intense cold, but they did not. They floated above, ahead of the clown, when they should have been streaming out behind him, trying to escape back into the Barrens, where some part of Ben's mind assured him the creature came from in the first place. Now Ben noticed something else. Although the last of the daylight had struck a rosy glow across the ice of the canal, the clown cast no shadow at all. None at all. You'll like it here, Ben, the clown said. Nat was close enough so Ben could hear the clud-clud sound its funny shoes made as they advanced over the uneven ice. You'll like it here, I promise. All of the boys and girls like it here. It's like Pleasure Island or Never Never Land. See the sights, have a balloon, feed the elephants, ride to shoot the chutes. Oh, you'll like it here, Ben, and you'll float. And in spite of his fear, Ben found that part of him did want a balloon. Who in the world owned a balloon which would float into the wind? Who had even heard of such a thing? Yes, he wanted a balloon, and he wanted to see the clown's face, which was bent down toward the ice as if to keep it out of the killer wind. What might have happened if the 5 o'clock whistle atop the Derry town hall hadn't blown just then, Ben didn't know. He didn't want to know. The important thing was that it did blow, an ice pick of sound drilling into the deep winter cold. The clown looked up as if startled, and Ben saw its face. The mummy. Oh my God, it's the mummy, was his first thought, accompanied by a swoony horror that caused him to clamp his hands down viciously on the bridge's railing to keep from fainting. Of course it hadn't been the mummy. It couldn't have been the mummy. Oh, there were Egyptian mummies, plenty of them, he knew that, but his first thought had been that it was the mummy, the dusty monster played by Boris Karloff in the old movie he had stayed up late to watch just last month. No, it wasn't that mummy. It couldn't be. Movie monsters weren't real. Everyone knew it, even little kids. We all float down here, the mummy clown croaked, and Ben realized with fresh horror that somehow it had reached the bridge. It was now just below him, reaching up with a dry and twisted hand from which flaps of skin rustled like pennons, a hand through which bone like yellow ivory showed. One almost fleshless finger caressed the tip of his boot. Ben's paralysis broke. He pounded the rest of the way across the bridge with the 5 o'clock whistle still shrieking in his ears. It only ceased as he reached the far side. It had to be a mirage. It had to be. The clown simply could not have come so far during the whistle's 10 or 15-second blast. But his fear was not a mirage. Neither were the hot tears which spurted from his eyes and froze on his cheeks a second after being shed. He ran, boots thudding on the sidewalk, and behind him he could hear the mummy in the clown suit climbing up from the canal, ancient stony fingernails scraping across the iron, old tendons creaking like dry hinges. The hands would turn him around and he would stare into that wrinkled, smiling face. The dead river of its breath would wash over him. Those black eye sockets with their deep glowing depths would bend over him. The toothless mouth would yawn, and he would have his balloon. Oh yes, all of the balloons that he wanted. So that's what happened to Ben in January. As he's reading in the library about the curfew, he thinks about the conversation with his mom, which leads him to think about what happened in January. He leaves the library after writing a postcard for Beverly, and he writes, "Your hair is winter fire, January ambers. My heart burns there too." So he writes that little poem for her and drops it in the postcard slot outside of the library. He goes over towards the bridge, looks into the Barrens, and the whole time he's fantasizing about Beverly getting this little postcard and them sharing a kiss. And he is interrupted with his thoughts by a hand, which causes him to scream because he was just, he remembers the clown thing. And it's Henry Bowers and the 2 other bullies. The whole incident plays out like in the miniseries. They pull him, they beat him up a little bit, and Henry carves an H into his stomach. In the miniseries, I don't think they actually were able to carve anything into him, but in the book they do. Henry gets off an H before Ben kicks him and falls back into the Barrens. And he falls only about halfway, but he does like kind of sprain his ankle. He's pretty beat up now. He's got a big bloody mark on his stomach, and he's got all scuffed up from falling, and his ankle is possibly broken or sprained. And then Henry Bowers just leaps from the bridge down to where Ben is and lands on his feet, which Ben is afraid he's going to get a bigger whooping, and decides to kick a branch, which knocks Henry all the way down into the Barrens. He rushes down to see what has happened, fearing that he might have actually killed Henry because it was quite a fall. And he sees that Henry is passed out. He's pretty banged up and bruised up, and he hears Victor and Belch coming down into the Barrens. He panics and tries to run. Henry grabs him by the ankle. And at this point, Ben kind of becomes enraged because he was having a pretty decent day. Ben was having a pretty good day. He left school, got some good grades, thinking about Beverly. He went to the library, he had some candy, and it was all messed up now because of Henry Bowers carving the H in him, and him having to run, and now he's in pain. So he decides to give Henry a big swift kick in the balls, and Henry screams out stuff like, you broke my balls, you broke my balls. And Ben watches him suffer, and he's totally happy about it until Victor and Belch start throwing rocks at him, in which Ben takes off running. And he kind of gets lost into the woods. He sees these cylinders, smells sewage, gets a bad feeling. But he eventually finds another cylinder after passing. He could hear like voices, but he didn't want to go in that direction because he didn't want to lead the bullies into some other unsuspecting kids. And he crawled into one of the cylinders, just like in the movie. And Henry Bowers and Victor and Belch were looking for him, where instead they decided to go confront the other 2 kids that were around, which we know are Bill and Eddie. And Ben's listening to all of it from the cylinder. He can hear like water splashing, which we know is the dam being broken. And he hears a crying, which is Eddie. Eddie mouthed off to Henry and got a big fist in his face and is now bleeding. This is where Ben falls asleep. He falls asleep for about an hour and a half inside of the cylinder while he's hiding. And this is where he remembers what happened with the clown in January. So an hour and a half later, he awakes and he crawls out, passes through where Eddie and Bill are, finds Bill and Eddie. Eddie's still wheezing on the floor, having an asthma attack. His face is bloody. And Bill says, help me. Can you watch my friend while I go get his medicine? And that is the end of chapter 4. So that is it. Chapter 4 is about young Ben's experiences and what he has, what he went through in the first day of school and his memories on his encounter with the clown. And then we find Eddie and Bill at the Barrens where the dam was being built. So I hope that helps. Thank you for watching, and next will be chapter 5. Bye.